Sanitation Project. I'm sending this shout out to Mr. Victor Oginga Nyagaya, Chief Executive Officer of the Lake Region Economic Bloc. The Lake Region Economic Bloc, abbreviated as LREB, is a conglomerate of 14 counties in western part of Kenya, otherwise known as the Lake Victoria region. The USAID Western Kenya Sanitation Project works in 8 of those 14 counties. So Mr. Nyagaya believes in innovative approaches, tools, and ideas that can help in advancing sanitation and menstrual hygiene interventions. Mr. Nyagaya believes in transformational approaches, disruptive approaches that allows the sanitation and menstrual hygiene community to do things like never before. Mr. Nyagaya looks at enabling environment to not only include or emphasize on policy and regulatory mechanisms that are sound and promotive of sanitation and menstrual hygiene, but also to include putting in place systems and mechanisms that allows for the communities to have easy access to sanitation and menstrual hygiene products and services.
So congratulations to Mr. Nyagaya from RTI, and to all the folks who, thank you to all the folks who sent in shout out videos like that one. We really appreciate hearing from the field. And so I would like to welcome you to day 4. It's Thursday. Happy Thursday, everybody. You made it. And so we're glad that you've come this morning to be with us and to be part of this plenary session. I would like to start off with a couple of announcements. As we have been saying all through the week, there are free masks if you're interested at the Water Institute table. And you all should still have your trusty hard copy programs. And so make sure that you're scanning QR codes out of that. And if you have lost it, then make sure you stop by the Water Institute table to scan the QR code for the agenda if you want access to that. A reminder that the abstracts, all of the abstracts that were submitted for the conference can be found in the abstract book. And so you can stop by the Water Institute table and make sure you scan the QR code to get access to all the abstracts. And again, we are joined each day for the plenary sessions by our virtual and online participants. So if everybody in the room can give a wave to the camera and welcome our online participants. They will be watching today and getting translation in Spanish, French, and Portuguese. So we're excited and we thank our translators for helping with that. And I also wanted to refer you to the JWASH Dev announcement and brochure in your hard copy program. And this was a special edition this year where we've worked with JWASH Dev, and they have sent invitations to the top ranked abstracts out of the process that we use, and we'll be featuring those publications in the JWASH Dev edition, so special edition. So please make sure you check that out in the program. Again, you can connect with us throughout the conference and after. To our website and through our social media at these Twitter handles. And now, as we've done each and every morning for the conference, we've had a graduate student from the Water Institute come and make opening remarks and special remarks to the online folks joining us. And today, these remarks will be made by Anjarul, and he will be giving a special shout out to his friends and colleagues in Bangladesh.
Thank you so much, Kira. Hi, everyone. My name is Anjarul Islam. I work with the Water Institute at Environmental Science and Engineering Department under the Gillings School of Global Public Health at UNC. Now I'm going to tell briefly in Bengali, which is my native language, welcome remark. সবাইকে অনেক স্বাগতম এবং ধন্যবাদ এই বছরের 2022 সালের পানি এবং স্বাস্থ্য বিষয়ক সম্মেলনে অংশগ্রহণ করার জন্য। আমি জানি আপনারা খুবই আনন্দ নিয়ে এবং মজা নিয়ে এই সম্মেলনটা উপভোগ করছেন। আমি অলরেডি আমার আগের কর্মস্থল আইসিডিডিআরবি এবং বুয়েটের কিছু মানুষের সাথে সাক্ষাৎ করতে পেরেছি এবং তাদের সাথে কথা বলে অনেক বেশি ভালো লেগেছে। আমি সম্মেলন স্থলেই আছি শেষ পর্যন্ত। আমরা যদি আপনাদের কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে তাহলে আপনারা আমার সাথে যোগাযোগ করতে পারেন এবং অলসো আপনারা আমাকে ওয়াটার ইনস্টিটিউটের ওয়েবসাইটে পাবেন। আমরা যেহেতু একই লক্ষ্যমাত্রা নিয়ে কাজ করছি, আমি খুবই আনন্দিত হব যে ভবিষ্যতে যদি কোনো কাজ আমরা একসাথে করে এই পানি এবং স্বাস্থ্য বিষয়ক সম্মেলনকে আরো আগায় নিয়ে যেতে পারি। ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে, সবাই ভালো থাকবেন। থ্যাংক ইউ অল।
Thank you, Anjurul. And again, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors for making the conference possible and for your support over the years. And now I would like to introduce the plenary for today, which is advancing the WASH agenda in 2023. And I turn it over to the moderator, Dr. Aaron Salzberg.
Jump. It's a quiet crowd. Good morning, everyone. Thursdays can be a tough day. Thank you for responding. I appreciate that. On Monday, I warned you that this week we were going to get a little policy heavy. And today we're going to start bending in that direction, in part because one of the reasons why we're here, we want science and evidence to inform policymaking. And as I said, Monday, 2023 has the potential to be a very special year in water. In March, governments will be meeting within the UN for the first time in perhaps 50 years to discuss an advance action to address the international water crisis. And it is a crisis, right? I think we can all agree, not just WASH, but water generally. These issues are featured in the press every single day, and this is a key problem for many countries throughout the world. On its good days, the UN can be inspirational, right? We've seen it. They can unite the world. They can create a vision that brings countries together on the future we want, stealing a phrase from the SDGs, right? And the UN can really provide a platform for creating new norms, for creating new driving institutional reform, creating partnerships that can engage people from across the world and creating change at a global scale. On its worst days, the UN can be highly bureaucratic, engaged in politics that yield what we often call de minimis, the lowest common denominator type of solutions that often ring hollow to real practitioners, and at times may even misguide governments and others into supporting vanity metrics that don't address the real challenges that we see within the sector. And so how do we balance between these two? Which UN are we going to get in 2023? A lot of that depends on us and depends on what we do. I'm really excited that we've got a great panel to kind of talk this through and talk through what's happening in the UN right now, this week on water, and what we might be able to do over the coming 6 to 9 months to perhaps change the trajectory of what the world is doing and how the world works on water. So I'm really pleased to be able to invite up a number of panelists. And I'm going to do that, and then I will ask the questions to the audience so you can see their responses, because I want to ask you guys a couple of questions as well. But I'm going to invite our panelists up. And do we have Johannes online? Has that happened yet? Okay, first I want to introduce Johannes Coleman. Johannes Coleman is the team leader for sustainable development within the Office of the President of the General Assembly. They were the ones who hosted the events this week up at the UN on Monday and Tuesday. We're very lucky Johannes will be joining us online. Up on the stage, I'd like to introduce Bruce Gordon. You all know from the WHO. He's the coordinator for water, sanitation, and hygiene at the World Health Organization. Ambassador is Rivelda Lopez, permanent representative to the United Nations from El Salvador. Diamaine Diom, the Minister Counselor and Representative of Senegal to the United Nations. And Joel Kolker, the Program Manager for the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership and lead water supply and sanitation specialist at the World Bank. And I'm very pleased to have all these folks. Before I turn it over to them and start asking them questions, though, I want to ask all of you a couple of questions and let them see the answers. How many of you knew of the 2023 conference? Okay, that's not bad. That's better than I would have thought. How many see this as an opportunity? Okay, how many are a little bit more cynical than that and just see this as a lot of hot air and not really convinced this is going to matter much? There's a few willing to put up their hands, but they're all keeping them low. Nobody wants to stick it up this high, but they're all going a little this high. So I appreciate that. Okay, that's good. And how many actually know how to engage in a UN process? In other words, you know what you can do to influence what governments might be doing in March. Okay, we've got 2 or 3, right? So a lot of ground to cover here. Okay, great. Is Johannes, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, you are there. We hear you. We don't see you. They may change. Is that up to me to change that, or will they change that?
I can see you and me in the Zoom, so.
Okay, there you go. Okay, you're there. Okay, good. You're up on the stage.
Okay.
So thank you, Johannes, for joining us. I appreciate it. And we're going to start with you. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of a flavor of what is this conference about? What are we trying to do? And what's the goal of the Secretariat for 2023?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone in the room, fellow panelists. I'm sorry I couldn't make my way. I was really hoping to be with you in person also to discuss a little bit further details, but it's a very, very busy week here in New York and I just couldn't make the way. So the 23 conference is really the midterm review of the Water Action Decade. That's where it all started off. And it has become now, I think, the crucial point in time where we can define, discuss and define those commitments that are needed to get SDG 6 implemented, but also to make sure all the related other processes like food security, like energy, but also the will to cooperate across sectors and borders gets implemented by 2030. This is, of course, a very high stake and we're very late. Everybody knows that, but there is a chance that we improve the water situation on the planet, that we create a more water secure and climate smart and sustainable world. And the conference next year is that point where we can all bring good ideas to the table and create those programs or activities or coalitions or investment opportunities or capacity development coalitions that can actually make a change. And so we are talking about game changers here. It's a little bit a hazy concept at the first look, but a game changer is really something that could come from the conference that involves member states, private sector players, academia, civil society in coming together and deciding in that conference together on a 10 or 15-page action plan for a certain topic. And we had on the 24th in New York, 1,200 stakeholders who have discussed game changers and who have tried to make first proposals or initial discussion points for these game changers that will be part of the Water Action Agenda. So the Water Action Agenda is the proposed follow-up mechanism from that water conference that we will have next year. And in that follow-up mechanism, we will have local or national voluntary commitments, and we will have some commitments that go beyond the local or national level. They must have an impact and must be anchored at the local level, but they are thought to be bigger and to bring together people across the boundaries and borders and normally their own sector views in terms of the issues that we deal with. And those game changers need to be developed, as I said, with a concrete action plan for the 23 conference. If we have them, we can agree on those game changers in the 23 conference and then go into the implementation of those. And then we still have a couple of years to really transform the way we're doing business. And maybe let me just make that one comment. I have heard many times that we have to double the efforts some 2, 3, 4 years ago to be able to reach SDG 6. And then I've heard this year in Stockholm, we have to quadruple the efforts. And I have heard from some people on Monday, we have to increase our finances by a factor of 9 to implement SDG 6. But really, this is all, for me, a proxy discussion. Yes, resources are needed, but first and foremost, we need to change the way, or to transform the way we think, design, and implement activities that are related to water and climate, or to water and health, or to water and energy. So the game-changing ideas will need resources, but first and foremost, they need to address behaviors, cultures. They have implications for legal systems or for policy. And so the real big expectation from next year's conference is to get these game changers and to bring those into the Summit for Sustainable Development Goals in September next year. So there is a chain of events now building up: the water conference in March. Then we have the September Sustainable Development Summit. And the following year, and that's a long perspective, I know, but sometimes we work with long perspectives in New York, is the Summit of the Future, where again, we will have an opportunity to really think big and really change some ways we do business.
Okay.
I want to stop here. I could talk on for a long time, but I want to give the floor to others and maybe also have some time for questions.
It's okay, Johannes, we're going to come back to you. Don't worry, we're not going to leave you. So the idea, I just want to make sure I understand it. The idea is that we'll end up with an action plan that includes a collection of game-changing ideas that will not be negotiated. So it's not going to be necessarily a treaty that exists between governments, but it'll be a guiding document for governments that we hope to then bring to additional summits as time goes on, either within the SDG summit or beyond, to monitor implementation, so to speak, of some of these game-changing ideas. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I mean, we can also think about having some UN resolutions after the water conference, or that will depend, of course, on the member states. So in the UN, we have a member state-driven process where members discuss and agree on resolutions, but that is one track, and we need to address that track. So of course, it would be good to have a UN resolution on, say, the human right to water, or the health-related issues that will be discussed in one of the interactive dialogues in next year's conference. I don't know, maybe Bruce will talk a little bit more about this interactive dialogue on water and health. But I also think that we need to just rally those stakeholders that are aware of that we need to do things in a different way, and just run with them. Like, we can discuss for another 5 years to have an accord of all the UN members and everybody around the planet. That will be good, will be important, will be a thing we want to have. But for me, the game changers need to be mandated by their sheer power, by the community that is behind them, and by their possibility to do things. So I have framed that sometimes the game changers need either to be too big to fail. They can be like an essential part of our agenda, or they can be too cool to fail, too attractive to fail. So I think those two possibilities can be used to make a game changer a success. We need the mandate through the people that are rallying for these game changers, and they must be fun and good. Thanks.
So Ambassador Lopez, you were in New York at some of these meetings
Yes.
earlier this week. Did you see any game changers? And is this the kind of outcome that we think will drive real change in the sector? Is this what you want to see out of this conference?
That's a very tough question. But well, thank you first for having me here. It's really energetic to have a discussion of this kind, but unfortunately we're having it outside the UN halls where the action happens. But I'm beginning my reflection with that maybe negative tone, but to give you maybe a message of you to be more involved in this process. However, what Johannes mentioned is that this outcome document that we're waiting for 2023 is not going to be open to negotiate. That's different from other outcome documents where member states come together, they make proposals, they reflect on it, and they try to negotiate and get to a consensual outcome document. That, believe me, that's really hard. Imagine 193 member states trying to come together and to agree on something. Even like a comma could be very challenging. I'm not overreacting. This is how it is. So I do, yeah, no comma. But what I'm telling is that I do understand maybe why this process is focusing on having an outcome document that could be a transformative agenda. That's what I expect it to be. But frankly speaking, we need you to make it happen. Because at the end, if this is a member states driven process, I see very limited involvement of member states on it. And that's why we have to be creative as member states to also that our interests, our priorities be reflected in this agenda. But at the end, it will be up to you to make your lobby, to try to encourage your governments to hear your voices. And what I don't want is that be another resolution, another document that will be only for member states to adopt in March, and that's it. If we want this to be a really game changer, as Johannes mentioning, we need to hear your voices as well. We're talking about academia, we're talking about private sector, entrepreneurs, we're talking about also developing agencies, bank agencies, so on and so forth. And you also need to mobilize so your governments can feel the pressure to also be more involved, and that this will not be another UN resolution, UN outcome document, because if we don't hear your voices, and if you don't feel also your interests reflect somehow of them, and neither the governments, forget it, nothing's gonna happen. So I'm very honest in this. I've been working in the UN for a couple of years, and I don't want this to be another resolution that stay on paper. But that's why we need to work together. We need to be created, all these UN agencies, different stakeholders, you that you're here, and that all your knowledge can also be part of this process. Because at the end, science is crucial. If we want to justify a proposal that will be reflected in that document, you have the knowledge. So let's try to work together to make it happen.
Great. We're going to get to a conversation about how to actually engage and bring science into this process and talk a little bit more about that. But can I push you a little bit on what would be the ideal outcome out of this conference for you and your country?
So I'm coming from a developing country, so my priorities will be not only to have a document that will guide and to boost solidarity. That's what is missing. Water is a cross-cutting issue. Water is not situation that it could be only for interest of one country or a region. And unfortunately, I don't see that interest yet at the UN at large. And I understand that there are many situations happening now in the international community that may deviate what the crisis of water it is, because there are many crises happening right now. So what I will expect first is that this document, this agenda will create that momentum, and that we don't lose that momentum, that guide member states and other stakeholders to make that change, to make that transformation. But also I would love to see a clear pathway for cooperation. For us, it's important to have this framework for transfer of technology and knowledges. For countries like mine, that's crucial. If we want to not only provide wash, but also to make it sustainable, we need that knowledge. We need also resources. Yeah, it's not only resources, as Johannes was mentioning, but for us, it's a combination of the two of them. Everything focused on solidarity and cooperation. If you don't have that, countries will continue working in an isolated manner. And we don't want that. We need to impregnate that kind of solidarity, that this is an issue that matters to all, not only to one country, but to others. But again, I go back to my previous message. We need to have more involvement from different stakeholders for that to happen, and to work together to this will be a very and real transformative agenda. Johannes was mentioning something, a behavioral transformation. How many people take water for granted? I mean, a very simple example, but how many of you go brush your teeth and leave the water run?
Nobody should put their hands up in this audience if they did.
I mean, even us,
But how many of our daughters or sons do that?
my daughter
right?
does it all the time. That's why I'm telling you. But we have to make the change also from us. Even like these small things have to make a change. But we are currently in a country that you don't have that problem. In my country, we had it all the time. So that's why in my case, I appreciate water so much. And that's why maybe some, as Bruce was telling me the other day, that I'm so passionate about water, because I've been lived to that lack of water in my life myself. So I don't want that my daughter will suffer the same, regardless of the country that she will be living. So that's why this agenda is so important for everybody, anywhere.
She's one of the champions up in the UN for this, which is why she's here today, and you can see why. There's another champion. Senegal hosted the World Water Forum this year and really took the stage in bringing together the international community around water issues. I'm curious, Mr. Diom, what does Senegal want out of this conference? What would be useful to your country, useful to the African community, useful to the rest of the world, given what you saw at the World Water Forum?
Thank you. Thank you for having us here, having Senegal here. Very grateful to be here to share Senegal's perspective. I will not be so eloquent like Her Excellency did, but I think that the outcome document we looking for, I think for Senegal, I think that the format is important, but not the main issue. What we want to have is first, as she rightly said, an inclusivity, everyone on board. It was what Senegal was calling on. Yes, United Nations is an intergovernmental organization, but we are here for people. And it is important that people, other stakeholders, NGOs, maybe my accent will be a little bit complicated for some of you, but yes, NGOs and private sectors, everyone should be on board in this outcome document, this conference. What we want is we as developing countries have a lot of challenge related to water. And what we want is concrete action to achieve what we promise to ourselves. But when I say what we promise ourselves, I think that the outcome document should not focus on the decade of action. We should think beyond. Sometimes I lose some word.
No, you're
We
good.
we should think and go beyond. It is important. It is very, very important. Yes, in the term of the document, I will quote Ambassador, it is important to have solidarity. Solidarity within the state, but solidarity between all stakeholders, not only UN members, but all stakeholders. I think it is very, very important. And Senegal is known for being a champion for cooperation on water issues, mainly transboundary waters. We fortunately with our neighboring countries, Mauritania, Mali, Guinea, and the other side, Guinea, Gambia, and Senegal had a very good organization, two organizations.
Yep.
In French, we call the one Organisation pour la mise en valeur du fleuve Sénégal. It is an organization for the development of the Senegal River Basin, whose include Mauritania, Mali, Guinea, and Senegal. Guinea because the river comes from Guinea. But we should have consultative talk, share all the resources, because the river is not only water. With the river, we're having electricity. Is a very, very challenging issues in our country. If we don't talk together, we'll be in the brink of going to fight, for example, for that. It is very important. Cooperation is very important. We have the same with Gambia also and Guinea. It is why Senegal also usually, beside cooperation, Senegal is always promoting water, peace, and security. We try to, during our mandate to the Security Council, we try to push for a resolution. Unfortunately, as a small country, we didn't succeed to have a resolution because you know what's going on in the UN. Some countries don't want to separate development issues, peace and security issues. Peace and security issue for the Security Council, development issues for the ECOSOC and GA. But we think that it is important to talk to water with security issues because it's obvious that water have security issues. It is why we push. We didn't have it, unfortunately, but we had a declaration. And not to be too long, our last the 9th World Water Forum we held in Dakar last year also talk about other things, that mainly water, peace, and security. I think that it is important. But another point I want to raise about the outcome document is to take into account the other meeting that happened. We had a lot of meetings who are not UN processes. For example, the World Water Forum. And we need to take this meeting into account. By the way, I want to flag that the Dushanbe conference was a milestone, and we need also to take this one into account.
Well,
Thank you.
this is the world's largest annual international conference on water and health. How are we going to bring our issues into this environment? How do we bring the outcomes of this meeting into that UN process? And I'm going to come back to Johannes, and I'm going to ask you that specific question because we want to know organizationally how we make this work. Before I do that, though, and I wanted to get short reactions just also from Joel and Bruce on what you want to get out of this, what you think would be an ideal outcome. But I'm also curious because you've certainly framed water within a very broad context, and this is part of the challenge that we're going to face within the UN. How do you elevate WASH issues within a very complicated water environment where there's a lot of other elements that are tied into this? How do you make the WASH issues stand out? the game-changing ideas, I don't know, we'll go back to Johannes and ask him if he's talking about one or two. Do we get one or two game-changing ideas for the entire WASH sector? How does that work? How are we going to be able to make that happen? How many of you know what your governments are trying to do within the UN for 2023? So we got maybe 2 or 3 people. So the idea that maybe we have another job to do on our own, which is how do we engage our own governments to understand what their positions are and let our voices be heard in those processes. Because I think both our government reps made this very clear that we need to be pushing our governments. Bruce, and I hesitate to ask, well, both of you this, Joel and Bruce, because I know you personally, and I know you have personal views on issues, and I know you represent institutions as well. What do you want to get out of this event? I mean, first of all, personally, I mean, look, I know how much you both care about this sector, and I know how much you've invested in this sector, and there are issues that you are passionate about. What do you want to see out of this conference, both as an individual, but maybe institutional? Hopefully they're not at odds with each other.
I mean, from a personal perspective, let me just say, I mean, one of the things I think is just incredible is seeing people like Ambassador Egrizalde here and the Minister Counselor who really are dealing with so many issues on a day-to-day basis talking about water.
Right.
Because I think from WHO's perspective, and even from my own experience, I mean, we talk a lot about pathogens in water and surveillance and water safety planning and all those things that are like close to the heart of WHO. And I've talked a lot to Jennifer about this, and she's really trying to kind of go more upstream and really address some of those broader determinants around financing that Joel's dealing with, integrated water resource management, climate. It's getting very complicated. But if we stay in a little bit of a silo here, I don't think we're just going to not kind of be able to reach those determinants. And I might say also, just to nod out to Johannes, Johannes is very plain speaking, and he's a no nonsense guy. And it's just wonderful to have him in New York kind of guiding this process.
Absolutely.
Because when we talk about, I mean, he may want to demystify these game changers. To me, I'm still a little bit mystified after seeing them all presented. And let me say they range from a new UN agency, to maybe some remote sensing. They're kind of at all levels and, with different stakeholder groups. And so part of me, there's a cynical part of me personally that wonders about the game changers because, is it something that is proven and that needs to be scaled up, or is it actually a new idea that has yet to find itself? And we probably need both. But I'm also very cognizant that there's been so much. I mean, most of the game changers, to be honest, I've heard them before. But a few of them, I just feel like they're so essential. They're already being done and they need just more attention, right? Because everyone's looking for the innovative new idea. And it's just like there's programs that are happening now, right, that we need to just work on. So I looking at Rick now on the JMP, right, for instance, one of the things that we were debating when we were publishing the JMP was, should we tell the world that we're 4 times off track? Because we don't want to be negative. And so, and we're at the midpoint of the SDGs. So the obvious thing to do, imagine if we didn't have a UN meeting at the midpoint of the UN, of the SDG saying we're 4 times off track. So for me, that's already, my expectations are a bit low, but that's already something. So when I see sort of this whole of government, people that are dealing with water, with finance, with all sorts of things, talking about water and health, that's already a success for me.
Well, and I think that hopefully the idea behind the game changers is that we're not doing business as usual, so to speak, but we're really trying to, as we were talking a little bit earlier, change the trajectory to go from a 1 or 2% growth in access that we're seeing in countries to a 4% and get them on a trajectory that will get them to it, which to me argues for much more systemic type interventions rather than the building wells and taps and toilets that we often focus on. How do we do that at scale, and how do we enable governments to do that at scale? I don't know, Joel, do I have that wrong? When you saw what was going on up in New York and you were talking about game-changing ideas, what resonated for you? What did you see that stood out as opportunities for us in the sector, or what do you want to see happen?
So let me touch on
Which,
that.
Bruce, you didn't answer, by the way.
I will answer, I hope. Look, I work for an organization that is laser focused at the country and the subnational level. So we're looking for universal access. We're looking for the SDG 6 goals, and that's at the local level, because water ultimately is both a water national and regional issue, and getting that right, whether it's water and sanitation or water resource management, the transboundary issues that we discussed briefly, which are so difficult and so critical. We've got to deal with all of those, and that, with all due respect to the UN, that's a great chamber for it, but we are very focused at the local and the national level. What I would like to see, frankly, is the SDG 6 goals, and we have to move forward with those very quickly. Breaking it down a little bit, what that means, I think we are, as someone who's tends to be very technical, and we do look down in we're very guilty of the silo approach in the water sector. But now a couple of years ago, I took a new job looking at issues that I had never been working in before. And I think we are terrible as a sector about talking about water outside our expertise. And what the presidents are looking for and our leaders are looking for is, how does water affect the economy? How does water affect jobs? How does water affect health? And how does water affect the environment? And if we can't talk in that space, we're constantly competing with other sectors. So we have to change our language, and we have to be better advocates about talking up rather than in our technical area. And that's a big statement coming from someone who spent the last 35 years talking about my technical area. But we have to do this differently. We have to realize who we have to convince, and we haven't done a very good job of that. On the issue of game changers, I completely agree, but I would pick up on Bruce's point. I think we know a lot of them. Yeah. We know that 56% of the subsidy money going on water and sanitation is going to the top quintile. That's rich people getting a lot of money. We know that, I mentioned this a minute in the last session, budgeted money that's allocated every year, we're only spending 70%. We can't be talking about private sector money when we can't even spend the public sector money we have, much less spend it effectively. So there's a lot of things that we know out there. We know how to get to efficiency in order to bring in private sector money. We know what we need to do in terms of technology and innovation. We know what we need to do in the gender issues. That's not to say we know what to do in every case. We're still behind on a number of things. But I think the question more is identify those key game changers that are going to make an impact and scale them up and really focus on them. And I think the conference is an opportunity to cut through all of those, and there are a lot of them, and pick on whether it's 10, 20, or 100 where we really need to do that. And there's been a number of instances where we fed into that. We just completed a paper looking at that around them with WHO and UNICEF. There was a high-level panel on water that we participated. We came up with like 30 recommendations there. I think we know a lot. And the question is, how do we implement it? And how do we implement it at the national level and the subnational level and the regional level?
Well, but on some of the challenges you just mentioned, 50% of the assistance going to the top quintile. What's the game-changing idea that would reform that?
So transparency on one of them. I mean, let's start with that. Okay. We
remember this for tomorrow's discussion, by the way, when you have a chance to talk to the US government folks and what they're doing, right? If you have questions, by the way, feel free to go up to the mics. Sorry, go ahead, Joel.
Someone has remarked that there's a development tool that some of you may be aware of called public expenditure reviews. They're used across sectors. Someone, not me, referred to them as the most boring development tool known to mankind. They are very technical. You go in and you look at the flow of money, and they are difficult to do. In some places, it's classified information, but it is a tool that we weren't using very frequently anymore. We had been using it quite extensively. We weren't anymore. More public expenditure reviews. Where's the money going? More transparency and policy on subsidies. How do you make a subsidy more efficient and more transparent? We've done a lot of analytical work on that. Tariffs. We hadn't done a new study on tariffs in about 12 years. We just released something looking at different ways that you can get at these efficiencies. So, there's a lot of work being done. I want to restate, we don't have all the answers. I don't ever want to come off as someone saying that, first of all, this is one institution or that we have all the answers. But I think we have a pretty good handle on what the issues are, and we work with a number of different partners to try to get the word out. Getting to scale is where we have the issue, I think.
Yeah, I actually very much agree with, little known story, when I met with Senator Frist to talk, this is before the Water for the Poor Act, which some of you may be familiar with in the United States. He was asking me, serious, what's the first thing I need to do? And my response to him was, you need to force the United States government to report on where their money is currently going. Because until you don't know what you need to do to fix it.
Well, now I'm worried that you and I have agreed.
I know, you and me both. You and me both, but that was one of the key elements of that legislation, was a yearly reporting requirement that the United States government had to report back to Congress on where it was spending its money, so we could do just that. So I'm a big fan of that, and I think that transparency does things. But all right, so Bruce, I need a game-changing idea.
Well, I mean, honestly, this is just off the top of my head, and it's kind of replicating something that I think works very well. But one specific thing I think is I was really excited about. I was just at a meeting the day before I left, was on the protocol on water and health in the European region, and it's just a really exciting way that countries have developed a way of kind of cooperating kind of together with firm targets and firm follow-up. It's only it's sort of the greater sort of European region with Central Asia as well. But it seems to work really well as far as all these issues around, accountability and making sensible targets, but also like sharing experiences with countries. So I think, again, I've always said we're very good at saying what ought to be done, and we're not very good at saying what could potentially be done to progressively move the agenda along and not be overwhelmed and paralyzed by analysis in these very difficult situations. And when we have that kind of structure take place, I think that goes a long way. So I think that could be something that could be scaled up globally.
Great. I'm going to get to questions in a second, but Johannes has to leave at 11:30. It's a very busy week up for the PGA. So I want to make sure I get back to him. Another question. Johannes, can you tell us a little bit about what the process is going to look like going forward for some of the different, let's say, subsectors within the water community to contribute to this discourse? In other words, how does the WASH sector, how is it going to be organized? How are we going to talk about drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene issues within this framework going forward over the next few months?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, for this question, and thanks for this discussion. I think it's very interesting to me to hear, and I agree with what the panelists have said. I'll answer your question in a minute. I just want to come back in very short terms to the game changers. The game changers, the game changers are not innovative. They are nothing new. They won't fall from the sky, and there's not going to be any UFO landing on the earth. But it's very clear to me that the game changers need to be those issues that we know of, where we need to do things differently. And I will make an example that's unrelated to health, but where the world has missed on an opportunity for a game changer. And that was, I don't know how old I was, but I remember this discussion when, I think it was in Ecuador, there was this discussion, should we give concession rights for oil exploration in the Amazon jungle? And I think Greenpeace or what was involved a big time at that point. And I remember vaguely that the discussion was, is the world willing to pay, I forgot the amount, was it 250 million or $3 billion to the government of Ecuador to not give out the concessions or not? And the world ended up not agreeing on paying for saving the biodiversity, protecting the climate, protecting indigenous people. And so in the end, we went ahead with oil exploration in the Amazon forest. So the game-changing ideas are those ideas where the world has to do things differently. And for water and health, I think some game changers that I remember from my time in Geneva is, will we have finally an agreement, a cooperation, a system, a mechanism where all the vector-borne diseases that have to do with water can really be or can be really assessed, and maybe do we get an early warning or outlook system for where we need to invest, prevent, or act in terms of water vector-borne diseases. So it's about creating and collating that information that everybody needs at the right scale. I'm not saying that we need all information, but it's about where do we need which information, and do we create that together? And we were not able to do that so far between WHO and WMO and other partners, I think. So that is something where, yeah, I think we need to think how to propose that to the 23 conference. And now back to the process. So for the conference, there will be the 5 interactive dialogues. There will be background paper on the interactive dialogue number 1, so on health, and the conference on Tuesday has also included the human rights into that interactive dialogue. So that interactive dialogue will be very decisive on how can we really account for the human right to water and sanitation, or the human rights to water and sanitation. And we will write, or the UN system will write a background document on that. But my firm belief is that in parallel, we will need to discuss those game-changing ideas. So do we have the right information for water vector-borne diseases available at scale at the right time? Or do we want to, we know what COVID has, or well, we don't know, but we can estimate what COVID has cost, and we can probably assess what a nice cholera or Ebola outbreak costs. So are we finally capable on this planet to create a preemptive way to deal with future situations? Can we act to prevent, instead of running around and throwing water at the fires that are breaking out all the time? And do we, for example, create, there are global health funds, Gavi and others, but can we create a more concerted version of that to really preempt the next, or work on the most important water and health related issues? And to do that, we have 2 possibilities. A, we can include those issues in the background paper as solution proposals for the interactive dialogues. That is one way, and that will be conducive to a good outcome of the conference. But the second possibility is that we now create informal, so to say, groups of countries, UN organizations, civil society organizations, business, that science, that work on those transformative ideas, and that make the 10-page proposal, that prepare the 10-page proposal in advance of the 23 conference. So what needs to happen is we need to find a mechanism now how the people, stakeholders who are interested in game changers can come together and find room to discuss these game changers that will then be part of the interactive dialogues and the water action agenda. And I actually have to leave soon because I will have a meeting with the Tajik and the Dutch co-hosts of the conference while they are still in New York on how exactly this process needs to take shape. I have some ideas how to do that, but there is no mandated mechanism how we can implement, so to say, an informal way how we can design the game changers between now and probably February, because it makes no sense to bring a game changer to the conference if there is no sufficient time for capitals or business organizations or so to buy into these game changers before the conference. So the game changers need to be ready by February. to have a chance to be actually supported and effective by March 22.
So wait a minute, they need
next
to be
year.
ready by February, but there's no process in place.
Well, the process needs to be driven in a bottom-up approach because top-down, nobody has thought about it. So, and I think it was also impossible really to really kick off this process before we have finally agreed on the format of the conference on Tuesday. Yeah, I know that it is a very ambitious plan, but if anybody who will listen to us today or who has an idea about a game-changing idea, please send me an email. I will connect you to the process.
You've got till February to come up with the idea and to build your coalition and to find the funding and have an implementation plan so that you can put that together by February. Sorry, so that's one way. The other is the interactive dialogue and the development of a background paper and the structure of that interactive dialogue. Who's leading the development of that background paper for the water and health sector? Bruce, do you know?
Throw out a couple insights from my side, but I think so. There's a process where some draft text needs to be kind of put on the table, and I think the proposition was that the so-called UN expert group on WASH, which is led by UNICEF and WHO, would, with that, the rest of the expert group, kind of get that text across to the UN system partners and members. And then following that, it would go to this is all process UNDESA, and then it would be further kind of.
How do stakeholders engage in that process?
So I think the stakeholders would have, tell me if I'm wrong, Johannes, but the stakeholders would have a process. Some stakeholders, I think that there's a decision that has to be made in terms of how we can actually manage this process, can potentially join that a number of discussions that we would hold in the context of the expert group. And then DESA, I believe, would be sending this document across to member states, and there'll be 2 co-chairs picked to also promote this process. So, I mean, I don't want to, maybe I should just say.
Johannes, you can't see us, but we've got a room full of stakeholders that I'm sure would love to be engaged in thinking that process through. How do they get engaged?
At the time being, they can do 2 things. There is no organized format yet to do that. So the only thing you can do is you can engage with UNICEF and WHO, because they will be leading the write-up of the background document. But the background documents in the UN are the background documents of the UN, where it's a process that involves all the UN agencies, and everybody will say how good and effective they are and how good their ideas are. So it is important that we find the voluntary coalitions that will now really, I want to have, or I hope that we have in 2023, log frames or proposals for log frames, how to implement game-changing activities in the coming years. And they don't need to be finally brought down to how much does which capacity activity actually cost, but they need to be specific enough so that we know who needs to be at the table, who is the target, what's the objective, and how do we get there. And if we get that endorsement from the conference, then that's good. And for the stakeholders in your room today, Aaron, I think there is only one way. Talk to Bruce, talk to me, or if you want to send an email to the co-hosts of the conference where you say, hey, look, we have a game-changing idea. We want to make sure it's in the water action agenda. Please register this. There is also a website, a conference website, where you can register commitments. And of course, if you have your own community organized and ready, you can register your commitment there. That is also a way how you make sure it's noted and it will be followed up.
persuasive. I'm watching all my WHO and UNICEF colleagues kind of hovering below their seats at this point. Johannes, yeah, right, well, right, exactly. Sorry, right, copy Rick and Jennifer on that. Johannes, I know you have to go. Is there anything else you want to add before you run?
I have another 5 minutes, then I need to really go.
Okay, then we'll come back to them. Of course, so you heard the process laid out. We can go to some of the questions. We'll come back, unless that's not a very inspiring process. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I mean, the background document sounds like a closed room where there's little opportunity for real outside stakeholders to get. Now, log frames, everybody in this room gets log frames. You want log frames, this group can do it for you for sure. I'm not sure our diplomats can do it for us, but.
So no, I just wanted to say on timing, right? Because you're right. I mean, I'm looking at everyone there like, what is going on? But we have to have a first draft of this document by early December,
right,
at the UN water meeting in Paris. And there needs to be a submission to DESA by the 30th of December. And I would imagine there's an opportunity to kind of comment into that. But so I'm just trying, we are not in a position to be able to sort of say, oh, we got 6 months to find a process that's perfect, so everyone could come and contribute. But I think, yeah, I mean, please, yeah, contact us. We will do the best we can, and we're trying to put a team.
Well, Bruce, but why do we have to, I mean, to me that, look, we want to make your life easier.
Yeah.
Right? You're clearly canceling your winter vacations. I can see that happening. I mean, how can you use this group? How can you use this venue? Can we create a more, can we do webinars? Can we host an event that would allow us to provide a little bit of structure to your conversations and input to what you're trying to do? Does it have to be as ad hoc as us all sending in email? Because part of this, if I get Johannes right, part of this is we're gonna have to build consensus around these game-changing ideas. We're gonna have to come with a collection of partners. And even if you get an email and the best idea in the world, if groundwork hasn't been laid with a broader group of partners, we're not going to be able to sell that to Johannes at the end of the day.
Aaron, can I say a last comment? Because I think I want to make sure that everybody in the room understands that the game changers are not clubs or exclusive. The game changers need to be led by a couple of volunteers who now define something that can be tangibly discussed in next March. And then the game changers are in the end designed so that from the March conference, everybody can engage with them and participate in the implementation of those. So really, this is not, it's not a closed club. It's not supposed to be, okay, some higher, I don't know, Deus Ex Machina invents a game changer and then nobody else can participate. It's to define now the rough action plans, and then together from the 23 March conference to the Sustainable Development Summit in September, really the community, and have maybe a funding plan by September next year, and then really start working as soon as we can. I am sorry, I have to disconnect from the meeting now.
One last question, Johannes.
I'm happy that we have started this discussion with you, Aaron, and the health colleagues, and I am really willing to engage in a follow-up process from the Office of the President of the General Assembly. So if you want to have follow-up conversations, or if you want to propose your own way how this community should engage on the game changers, then please let me know. I will transfer that idea or proposal or message to whoever will work on those issues that are related to water and health. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you soon.
Hang on, one quick question, because I have witnesses here too. Did you wear a tie on the floor of the UN?
I sometimes wear a tie, sometimes not.
Ah,
Today
I'm
untidy.
I lost the bet. All right, thank you, Johannes. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
You didn't seem confident in that approach.
Well,
I
I guess that
apologize for folks who are standing for a little bit, but I'll come back.
it's just that I'm reading the room. And I see like a lot of question marks in your faces, like what? So what we were discussing just 2 days ago in another side event, when a person with disability asked, where are us? Where are we, like persons with disability? I don't see myself in this process. And what it came to my mind, and that's something that we can try to talk also to DESA and to the president of the General Assembly, is that we don't have to forget that at the end, the UN is not only the headquarters in New York or Geneva, Vienna, Nairobi, so on. We have presence of the organization in almost every country. So one of a powerful network is the resident coordinators. So they are basically in many of the developing world countries. They are basically the representatives of the Secretary General. And since DESA, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, it's the secretariat of this process, maybe we can try to engage them. Because what I believe it could be important is to use this network so we can have, in partnership with member states, to organize this kind of workshops, for instance, where different people's sectors, they can jump in and provide their insights there, or like brainstorming about these game changers that we were talking about. So for instance, it could be women, it could be youth, persons with disability, indigenous peoples, academia, I could go on, private sectors. So to try to have this discussion, not only in the UN headquarters, I mean, what you're doing here, this is precisely what we need. That people from different walks of life, from different experiences, they come together and we can try to see how to influence the process. The big question is what you ask, how? So let's try to reach to the president of the GA, listening to what you have to say through a written input, but not to just send an input and believe that it's done. You have to do the lobby from here till February, March. Because what I also would like to see is that this conference will not be the end, but just the beginning of a reinforced activism on water.
Well, we do have some of those champions in the room. You didn't mention workers. Workers are going to be a key part of this. Eva, you're out here somewhere. Thank you. Here's your chance to put this idea and get this stuff forward. Joel.
So I want to come back to your first question, which is what's the goal? The goal is water services at the national, regional, and subnational level. And if that's the case, a conference, whether it be a UN conference, a national conference, or a conference here, is part of a process getting there. And I think that's where we have to keep our eye on the ball. That's the goal. The goal, the conference is just an enabler, an important one, don't get me wrong. But I think there's multiple opportunities. Many of you, while your focus may not be at the UN or the international level, it's very much in the country level. You look at the abstracts, you look at the reports, people are talking about what's going on in Mali and Malawi and all kinds of places around the world. Your opportunity to influence, frankly, from where I sit, is much more impressive and much more important if you're focusing at the country level. And picking up on that point, and back to the second point I made, which is that we need to get more integrated. This is the largest water and sanitation conference in the world, you say, but 90% of water is being used in agriculture. And we're not talking about water and health and agriculture. And I'm not calling you out.
Oh, some of us are. Some of us are.
Where is guilty as others? We had during the pandemic, our lending around WASH through the health work that we do went up significantly, and we've seen it drop off again. So I'm not calling you out, but I do think that we have to get smarter in terms of how we're talking about water issues and not stay in our silo, but really try to influence the ultimate decision makers. And that's what the conference is trying to do. If we don't reach SDG 6 through the conference, but we can talk about water in the context of climate change, water in the context of health, and have every one of those experts start talking about water as they're talking about energy or urbanization or other things, then that's helping us with the agenda and the ultimate goal.
Yeah,
So-
but that's hard and it's scary. I mean, I'll
Why?
speak for, well, I think that, you know, if you think about a microbiologist who does work on water quality, but doesn't know much about climate or transboundary or agriculture and can't properly contextualize those risks within that broader context, it becomes a real challenge. Some of us walk that, right? We walk across those different spheres. And that's one of the reasons why I try to do the job that I do, is that I can help better contextualize water and health within the broader context of water security risks and everything else that we talk about, and make it a good case and an argument for it within that framework. But that's often awful intimidating for a scientist who may be working on one aspect of this. We talk about this in the water quality lens, about the idea of, you know, even when we talk about lead in drinking water, should we all of a sudden stop everything we're doing till we can get the lead out of the systems? But no, it's about progressive improvements and progressively, you know, as Jennifer said yesterday, it's a risk-based approach to progressively improving the supplies and service level we can offer people. And we need to keep moving in that direction and not do things that necessarily hurt us from that. Not many folks can contextualize that across all those risks.
But if we can't contextualize it, we can't influence the decision makers. I'll give you a great example.
Exactly right.
I'll give you, I am not a water security person, but earlier this week, we were in a conference. I am a finance person, and just there's a term in financing called securitization. And I won't even go into it, but we use it all the time. And we were in this conference and suddenly someone was talking about securitization, and they weren't talking about a finance instrument.
Nope.
They were talking about guns and weapons around water.
Yep.
And you know, we have to figure out the language we use, and this is getting more complicated than less. Clarissa and I talk about this around financing. There are people who use financing tools, terms all the time, and you put them in front of hydro engineers, it's very difficult. Now we're adding the climate language, and then you start adding the health language. But if we don't do that, I'm not saying that every scientist needs to know how to talk to a policymaker, but if we don't get our act together and better talk to the people who are making the decisions about policy and money, we're not going to move this agenda.
Perfect. Thanks, Joel. I appreciate that. Pete, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Pete Kolsky. I'm associated with the Water Institute. I retired from UNC, where I'm emeritus, which means past my cell date in Latin several years ago. But I got involved in the sector in 1973, which is nearly 50 years ago, working on village water supply in Madagascar. And I became passionate about the subject and have happily worked on it since then, except since retiring. One of the things I wanted to call out in particular, I was very appreciative of Monsieur Diome's observation about wanting to look beyond 2030, because nobody in the, I won't say nobody in the world, very, very, very few people in the world know about or care about SDG 6.1 as in those terms. And 2030 will not go down in history as the year when SDG 6.1 was reached or was not reached. And Monsieur Diome pointed out that we've got to be thinking about the longer term. I think about the longer term because I've watched 49 years of the longer term. And I think one of the things that the sector does wrong, at least the last 6 or 7 years, or I don't know how many years it's been going back, is that we talk about the risks of not meeting the target rather than looking back at what has been achieved, which is actually, I think, an enormous amount. I mean, I think where water and sanitation was, where the methodologies were, where the understanding of how important the private sector and small scale private sector, the role of NGOs and community-based organizations. In 1973, relatively few people understood anything about that. I had the privilege of living through the water supply and sanitation decade from 1980 to 1990, which probably none of you have heard of. And the goal of the 1980 to 1990 decade was water and sanitation for all by 1990. Now, I didn't know much because I was a lot younger then, but I knew when I first read that goal, I laughed out loud because I'd learned from my villages in Madagascar. I had worked on 3 village water supplies and I felt great about it. And then I realized how many thousands of villages were there in Madagascar that didn't have water. So I could do this for a lifetime and not really influence very much. But things have got better, and the JMP has documented that things are getting better and we actually know how to do things. And there are certainly ways we can do them better and we can learn from positive experiences of the past. But tying it to the SDGs and to a time, I understand the benefits of time-bound constraints, but it's a language that will switch off. I mean, you know, we've all, those of us who've worked at the bank or elsewhere know that when you work on a local level with a mayor and you talk about the SDG, they look at you blankly because it doesn't matter to them. What they care about is they've got poor people in their city that don't get water.
So there's a risk if we don't do this right, we're going to walk away. And we're going to forget about the UN process and we're going to get disenfranchised with some of these elements and we're going to have to find our ways forward.
And I haven't heard SDG 6.1 or in fact the UN being mentioned. It's a major political issue in the current midterm elections in the United States. That's not what people are thinking about. But I think we have a great story to tell. And I think actually being positive about the story rather than saying it's going to take 10 times as much money or 4 times as much money as budgeted to reach SDG by 2030. It's just it's a factoid that's actually not very positive or very helpful.
Well, I don't, from my experience in government, positive messages don't move governments. I mean, you guys tell me if I've got this wrong. I think we do have to be transparent about where we are and that we're missing the targets. I think, you know, we've got to make priorities, and often what we often say in DC is you're going to avoid this problem until it swims up and it bites you on the tail. And you need to make the case, as Joel said, in economic, in security, in health terms.
But part of the case is we know how to do it, or we're learning how to do it.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, I'm going to go over there. Any quick reactions before I go to the other side? Nope, other side. A little bit shorter because we do want to, I'd like to get through some of the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be
Thanks.
as fast as I can. My name is Jeff Tidyman, and I work in the private sector. Joel, you made a couple comments that I didn't completely understand, so I came up to ask for clarification, if I could. A lot of the focus, it was just mentioned that we need to spend 4 times as much money, for example, if we're going to reach these goals. That's been kind of a focus this week of making sure that government entities are allocating the proper resources to, you know, for capacity development and everything else. If I understood you correctly, and if I didn't, I apologize in advance. I heard you say in a breakout session, and again this morning, why are we even talking about public-private partnerships when the public sector is not spending the money that they're allocated? You're shaking your head, so I must have misunderstood.
Yeah, no, I'm a private sector guy, so.
Right.
The private sector absolutely has a role. Full stop. What that role is depends on the country and the policy environment in the country. But there's absolutely a role. I mean, in this country, the vast majority of the infrastructure is paid for by private sector. If you have a pension, if you have an insurance policy in the United States, you have probably funded a water system somewhere or a sanitation system. So there's no doubt the private sector has a key role.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And putting that aside for just a moment, did I misunderstand the other half of that statement, which is the public sector is not currently spending the money that they're allocated?
So this goes back to the public expenditure reviews. This is in a selected number of countries. There's a report that we released a couple months ago that looked at the allocation of resources in about 50 countries over 15 years and looked at the spend rate. This is not new money. This is not looking at the goal we were trying to raise. This was money that was allocated the first day of the fiscal year and how much of it was spent in the last day of the fiscal year. And the average, I think, was about 70%.
Why is that?
Because we have inefficiencies in our system.
Thank you.
A really important issue though, right? Because the argument we often hear from these entities is we need more money. And there's a, you know, question, right? Do you give them more money versus are we addressing these inefficiencies that are not even allowing them to program their money more effectively? Again, another question you can ask your US colleagues tomorrow.
You do both.
We do both. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Richard Allen. I'm a vector control, vector-borne disease expert, I suppose. I'm the director of the Mentor Initiative. I used to be WHO. A question for Bruce. It's not really a question, it's a comment. And for the panel, but stimulated by Johannes. He mentioned wanting to have early warning systems, maybe vector-borne disease was something that should be a game changer. You mentioned something that might just come around and bite your backside. Well, let me tell you, we know an awful lot about vector-borne disease. We know an awful lot about what's happened since the gentleman in front of me started work in Madagascar in the 70s. That is, we've seen an explosion in the fastest growing disease, bar COVID, on Earth, and that's dengue fever. It's transmitted by a mosquito that lives in the very water that we create every time we put water supplies that are uncontainerized in terms of sealed into urban settings. Since the 1970s, we've had the most incredible ramping up of urbanization and of piped and unpiped water supplies. At exactly the same parallel, we've seen this escalation of dengue fever and multiple other viral diseases transmitted by the same vector, ramping up from 2 countries to 129 in 50 years. We ignored it at our peril. We now have cases in France, and it's very appropriate, Bruce, the next meeting's in Paris. We had 5 cases of transmission of dengue fever and chikungunya in southern France this summer. Behind that, and what's much more worrying, and perhaps this will get people's attention, and as Mr. Diomi brought our attention to, water has many other implications. Malaria, we've been fighting a battle, and that was my role and has been all my life, for a long time, to bring down malaria rates across the world. It's the main killer in most of the countries that we're struggling to put water supplies into. And now we're beginning to realize that a vector that looks just like the Aedes mosquito, Anopheles stevensii, is invading urban settings at a rate that's terrifying. It's now from East to West Africa. It's found in Nigeria. It's found all the way across the eastern countries, and so it must be across the middle countries. It's the vector that lives in urban settings. It lives in the open, containerized water, and it transmits malaria. It's probably our greatest threat now to controlling malaria in the next 10 years.
So you're going to get at least one email, Bruce, out of this. Hopefully you get more, but at least one. No, thank you for the contribution. Bruce, did you want to?
I'll respond after, it's okay. I just was going to say, I think some of these issues around emerging disease or resurgence of disease will drive awareness more than, because we typically talk about diarrheal disease, which people don't seem to care about so much.
Right.
So I think it's a fantastic point. And I just wanted to clarify, sorry, just getting back to this very logistical point, but I felt bad a little bit about that email. Write me an email because we know it's not going to work. But
you'll have a chance to also clarify.
Yeah, no, but just to say, I think, Aaron, just to clarify one thing, the health, because there's 3 papers, or there's this whole game changer voluntary kind of commitments. There's a health paper, there'll be one also on development and climate change and so on, right? So these are separate processes. And then there'll be the days where the member states will be making statements.
Commitments.
Yeah, exactly. But precisely on the health paper, the point of departure is going to be the state of drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene, which brings together all this information. And Clarissa had a session on this on Monday. So that's going to be the basis. But I think I really like your idea of holding a little consultation, because it'll be impossible to deal with 300 emails. But if people can see some of this text that hopefully they agree with, but there may be bits and pieces that are missing, like more of an emphasis on some of these, emerging vector-borne diseases, then, send them to us. So maybe we can talk about how we run that consultation, or sort of webinar. It'll be probably a virtual thing.
We've got a Rolodex. We can work with that.
Okay. Anyway, just wanted to, sorry, because I know we were all like,
As long as
"Oh my
we
God."
we do not
Now
give
we
away
can
your
deal with this.
information to anybody that asks, but we could invite you to a meeting. No, thanks, Bruce. I appreciate that. Over
Yeah, hi, this is Kavita from IHS. I think Aaron brought it up, but I just want to say it again. While we're talking about inclusion and human rights, I just want to again bring the focus back to the workers behind the whole chain in water and sanitation, but particularly, of course, sanitation workers. I'm very glad at least 2 plenaries had brought up the issues of sanitation workers, but it can't be siloed. So I think their voices need to be heard in this consultation. And I would say directly, I mean, this is my community, but we are not the intermediaries and they can speak for themselves. We've seen examples. So just a small litmus for that.
Well, and I do think, I mean, that this is an environment for some orphan issues that we haven't seen addressed. Workers, I think, is one of them. I saw a poster yesterday. I don't know if you guys saw this poster on incontinence. And I didn't realize how, mentally terrifying it was for these people who suffer from incontinence in humanitarian settings when they can't address these issues. And the suicide rates among people who suffer from incontinence in displaced settings or in humanitarian settings. So I think there's some orphan issues that we can build it. Workers, I think, is one of those. The stigmatization around workers, I think we have to come up with some game-changing ideas that address some of the systemic underlying issues about how workers, particularly in the sanitation area, are treated.
Yeah, and just to say, it won't be really a game changer if it's not a game changer for the workers.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, Susie.
This is height
Sorry,
discrimination. I'm Susie Proctor, newly minted MPH, one of Aaron's nightmare students. I feel like I've, with the talk about game changers and stuff, I feel like I've heard this concept tiptoed around, but I just want to ask about innovation at this conference. So I think it pertains a lot to what you've talked about with funding, what we talked about with, bringing, citizen voices and calls to action. And I'm just kind of wondering, to what extent do you see innovation being discussed and I guess accommodated in these discussions at this upcoming conference, and what kind of actions do you see coming out of it with regards to promoting innovation, and do you even see it as being a necessary element? So
Innovation.
Joel?
Well, talking about private sector, that's where most of it is. So absolutely, we need it. Many, many years ago, I worked in the energy sector. And if you look at what innovation has done in terms of energy, it's completely transformed the sector. There's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of analytical work. There's a lot of investment going in around water and innovation. I don't think we've completely cracked it yet. We're certainly not where energy used to be, but we have certain opportunities, particularly around the reuse issue and the circular economy, because I think that's going to be quite critical given the water security.
Oh, but Joel, let me dig a little bit deeper. I know we got to close soon, but the World Bank, you give a lot of grants, a lot of money. How do you build in mechanisms into those relationships that supports innovation, that allows for failure, that reinforces the need for data collection and learning from those processes? How do you guys do that?
and how do you integrate it into policy?
And sorry?
And how do you put it into policy from?
So you've set me up for the perfect closing. So
Okay. I didn't realize that, but that's okay. We'll segue into that.
with the support of the Gates Foundation and USAID and a number of other donors, we have a think tank that does exactly that. Governments, when the World Bank is a bank, so people do have to repay, the sovereign has to repay. It's often, if you're getting IDA funds, it's an extremely low interest, but it is a loan, and governments do not want to pay for a lot of that kind of analytical work. So with the support of our partners, we are able to kind of fund that upstream work. And then the unique part of this that we found very helpful is we don't just release reports. We want to make sure that it's embedded into that dialogue and that process. One of the criticisms we have is it takes us a long time to put the project together. It can be anywhere between 6 and 18 months. But there's a lot of negotiation, there's a lot of safeguards, there's a lot of policy reform that goes into that process, and that analytical work feeds into it. As important as it is on that upstream design phase, then we take anywhere between 5 and 8 years to implement a project. And again, we're reinforcing that knowledge and that change in the innovation during that process. Do we get it right all the time? Absolutely not. but it's got to be reinforced. And you need that investment up front. And often governments don't want to take precious loan money where they like to see going into infrastructure and use upstream money. It's been very cost effective. It sounds like a lot of money. We're spending around $35 million a year, but we're leveraging our influence into that around 13 or $14 billion worth of lending. Again, that's not nearly enough of what we need to do, but we think we have a model, and linking that knowledge with operations, with a lending operation, we've found to be very effective. So thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, we're gonna go around. But Joel, but I'll let you start first and just continue for a second. Then we'll go to Bruce and Diome and Her Excellency. Any other final words that will either lead or inspire us in the right direction here?
Well, lead, I'm not sure, but certainly inspired. I mean, I'm not one who goes to New York very often, but I think any attention.
In fact, you're kicking and screaming. Let's be honest.
I am a reformed New Yorker, like a reformed private sector guy. So I love going to New York, but I don't go to the UN very often. But anytime we are talking about water to non-water people, it's a positive thing. And I think there are opportunities coming out of this, particularly at the national and local level. And that's where you can be influential.
Thanks, Joel. Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, I think with this whole process, if we look again, we've been talking a lot about what can we do, in the few months before Christmas and the few months after Christmas, and then we're there, right? So I do think there's some constraints to what happens before March 2023, and then there's a question of what happens afterwards. And I don't know the whole UN kind of outcome thing so well, but I do know WHO resolutions, and those they're only as good as how much people kind of use them. It's a tool. It's a tool that you can use in every country. It's an NGO can use them, a community-based organization can use them. Anyone can use them. And it's kind of like, this is what the consensus was. And so that's why I was talking to Jan Willem earlier about having a common voice. We all need to really speak, and it could be on the level of definitions, and methods for monitoring, but it really needs to be, I think, Joel, you were talking about it, just this kind of agreed approach, terminology to what we feel collectively needs to be done. And so I think we need to get together, basically, and we need to use this. I mean, we heard in that meeting, we heard generational opportunity. And all I can tell you is I am sort of cynical. I have a cynical side like you, or a questioning side like you, Aaron. But when I left the meeting, all I thought was the vast majority, like 80, 90% of the member states in the room spoke. And I would say the same amount wanted to actively contribute to drafting, moderating, co-chairing. It wasn't just like, oh, water is a non-contentious subject in a world of contentious subjects, so we'll say something nice. I do feel like there's political will, but I feel like we need to actually come and support that process. So it's not the time to be cynical. And I understand what Pete's saying, but I do feel like, the SDGs, they are what they are, and maybe in 2040 we'll forget them, but I do think they're kind of a beautiful thing that we all agreed to. And so let's use them.
Thanks, Bruce. I don't want to, I will speak for the community, but I think we want to draft, we want to moderate, we want to be part of that conversation as well, too. And so I think we're anxious to work with you guys in how we do this. Mr. Diome, can you inspire or lead us in the last few seconds?
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I like the sir said about me saying that we should go beyond 2030. But I think that also we should set a regular, I don't know if it is the correct expression, but we regular date to have this kind of meeting. Because the last meeting exclusively on water organized by the UN was in 1977. Then we need to, like other regular meeting, no, each 10 years or each 5 years or extra, have this kind of meeting to evaluate what has been done since the last gathering. I think it is important. The second thing I want to say is our life is linked to water. Every activity is linked to water. To say that everybody should be involved in this process. Don't wait to be invited. Reach out to who you should reach out. Your local government, your national government, private sector, everyone should be involved in this process. It is important. It is our life. It is important. A third point is, fortunately, the PGA, sometimes we got good ideas there at the UN. Yes. And the PGA, his presidency this year is based on science and technology. I think it's a tool we should use in this conference to achieve what I said it before, what we promised ourselves. No letting anyone on board, push everyone to have safe water for drinking. I don't know, sometimes I lose the words. Safe water, quality and quantity water for everyone. Everyone. You should be in the mountain, you should be in the desert, you should be in the cities, you should be in the. I'm from a small village in Senegal, fortunately near the coast. We don't usually, we are not in the desert, but it's challenging sometimes to see ladies, mainly ladies, because in our culture, it is the responsibility of ladies to go search for water. They search for water, they cook, they go search for the energy, how we call it, the fire, yes, firewoods, all that on ladies. And also they help men on at the field, agriculture. That's why it is important to have access, safe access to quantity and quality water. Thank you.
No, thank you. And by the way, all of you deserve some credit for Chaba Kurosi. Chaba Kurosi, who's now the president of the General Assembly, who was with us last year. One of the things that we impressed upon him was the importance of science and evidence in informing this policy process. And so hopefully we can take a little bit of credit for the fact that this is one of the main directions that the President of the General Assembly is really pushing in these discussions. It's the importance of science and policy. Pastor Lopez, it's up to you.
Thank you. So these are my final thoughts, right? So I have to tell you something that remember was brought to my memory thanks to the gentleman that asked to provide the comment on the vector-borne disease. In the 80s, big problem of dengue. And it wasn't possible. Can you hear me?
I think they're bringing it back.
No?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Okay. So as I was saying, back in the 80s and 90s, in El Salvador and many countries from Central America, there was a big problem of dengue and other vector-borne diseases. And it was almost impossible to tackle that. And that's what awareness raising campaigns were so crucial. So people will do their part to, remove all these things that were also like those that producing the mosquitoes and so on and so forth. I had dengue so many times when I was a child. Despite what my family was doing, you know, protecting, it was a community issue because you could do your part, but if your neighbor is not, then it's a community problem. Okay, so it was a community issue, like everybody has to do their part of it. But it took a while. It took a while for their own people to get that sensitivity, that sense of ownership. I can make a change. So right now it's not an epidemic, it's not a crisis in El Salvador, but it took us a while. So what I want to bring with that very local level example, it's the importance of water, the quality of water, the access of water. Now water can cause so much trouble, either because water is lacking or there is too much water. We could see that, for instance, what happened in Pakistan just a few weeks ago. But at the end, water is everything. Water is us. So that's why this conference should not be business as usual. And that's what I really hope for my fellow colleagues in the UN, that they could see this as the same opportunity that you are also seeing it. When we began this session, I saw so much enthusiasm. And I don't know, I could sense some of you that I don't feel that enthusiasm as we began. But what I want to finish is as how I saw in my country, how people were able to make a change. You can make it too, regardless where you are. If you are a worker, if you are an academic, if whatever you're doing, but you need to make your voice heard. And we have to not to forget that one of the things that COVID really show us is that how powerful social media and communication is. So use it. Use it to communicate your thoughts, your expectations. Use it to communicate, to make workshops, you know, to brainstorm, not only about what we have left to do, all the challenges, but also what we have achieved, as some of you were mentioning right now. But also, what do you want for the governments to commit and to fulfill? So thank you. Gracias.
Make your voices heard. Thank the panel, please. All right, if you guys can step down for a quick second, we have one more piece of business to do and then we'll turn you loose for lunch. Yep, no, thank you. You know, one of the things we've talked a lot about this week, but we haven't demonstrated, is that a lot of organizations are adopting their own research and learning programs and efforts to improve the work that they do. And what we wanted to do is to create an opportunity to highlight one of those organizations. Thank you so much. And I'll come back in a second. Highlight one of those organizations just very briefly, so they can talk a little bit about how they're advancing research and learning within their own programming, as an example that we might be able to think more about how we can internalize that in our own organization. So am I turning it over to you, Justine? Justine, it's all yours. Sure.
Hi, everyone. I'm Justine Lee, and it is my pleasure to address all of you at the plenary today. I also want to say that it really is a privilege to share a platform with such passionate and knowledgeable WASH champions. It can be really energizing, as Ambassador Lopez said. So I'm especially excited to announce that at this year's conference, World Vision is launching our 2022 to 2026 WASH Research and Learning Agenda. And I would like to shout out Ben Tidwell, who is our research lead, and for your vision and your work on this, as well as every writer, expert, and reviewer who've contributed. This document is not just aspirational, but operational. It covers a priority research questions, but it also details dozens of ongoing studies aimed at answering those questions, as well as draws a line in the sand from which we will measure our progress. It covers 6 technical areas, including water security and resilience, gender equality and social inclusion, critical contexts such as schools and healthcare facilities, and core values such as human flourishing and WASH and faith integration. But the foundation of this document for us, the theme that underpins all of our learning efforts, is really research equity. As I'm sure many of you already know, WASH research can have powerful impact on equity and inclusion for the entire sector, especially because applied WASH research often informs the design of policies and of services. It therefore matters all the more, not just what we are learning, but also how we are learning and who gets to participate in the generation of WASH knowledge. Grounded in the findings of our exploratory study on decolonizing WASH research, which is now available as a preprint online, we have established transparent goals around funding allocation and the balance of authorship to catalog our own efforts and to hold ourselves accountable. We're committed as well to increasing our partnership with low and middle income country-based researchers and institutions, and to pushing for greater collective action across the sector on research equity. If you haven't yet stopped by the World Vision table, I hope that you will do so, because we really enjoy coming to this conference to engage and to learn from others. And we would love to discuss on how we can join together in the push for this research agenda that we've identified. We're pleased to be a sponsor, and we look forward to meeting you all. Over to you, Kata.
Just a couple of announcements as we close out the plenary. One is that you can put luggage into the wintergreen room. It will be unattended, but as you're starting to clear out, you can bring your luggage into that room and we'll hold it for you until you leave. Today we have special lunch sessions. One is focused on healthcare facility interventions in the Sunflower Room. And I know they would really appreciate it if you would get there as soon as you can and as soon as we break for lunch. And then we have the Careers in WASH in the Magnolia Room with Joyce from the Acquia Institute and James from USAID. And then I want to remind you folks to come back tomorrow at this same time and place, where we'll be talking about the White House, Congress, and the United Nations, a global pivot on water. And there's a list of our panelists and the moderators for tomorrow's session. Again, thank you to our sponsors. And again, thank you to Ambassador Lopez for coming today, as well as Minister Counselor Diom. Thank you to Bruce and to Joel, and also to Mr. Coleman for joining us today via the interwebs. So thank you, everybody. Have a lovely lunch, and we'll see you at the side events.
একাকাশে তারা তুই একা গুনিস নে উড়িতে দিস তুই কিছু মরে একাকাশে তারা তুই একা গুনিস নে উড়িতে দিস তুই কিছু মরে ওরে সব ভালো তুই একা বাসিস নে একটু ভালো বাসতে দিস মরে সব ভালো তুই একা বাসিস নে একটু ভালো বাসতে দিস মরে পুরো যোছনা তুই একা পোহাস নে সঙ্গে মিশরে তুই মরে পুরো যোছনা তুই একা পোহাস নে সঙ্গে মিশরে তুই মরে ওরে সব ভালো তুই একা বাসিস নে একটু ভালো বাসতে দিস মরে সব ভালো তুই একা বাসিস নে একটু ভালো বাসতে দিস মরে চলে সুখের